Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to introduce you the speakers because you all know who they are. They are highly educated, experienced, erudite, and knowledgeable. You have all the information about them here, and if you want to know more, ask them. As you lot, academic, historian, and so on, are not terribly disciplined, I'm going to time you. Okay. Kemény, János.
Thank you very much. And because I'm low on time already, I'm afraid, I will try to start immediately. So I will talk about how Hungarian intelligence wanted to probably work on the Soviet subject. And this is, for me, a very fascinating thing because if you know how Hungarian foreign policy went in the 1980s and especially in the late 1980s, there were moves which were then considered pretty bold. But I will try to show you that although the Hungarian Foreign Intelligence Service wasn't really allowed to work against the Soviet Union, they collected pretty big amounts of information and scientific material from Western sources, through which they probably had a pretty good picture on how things are going in the Soviet Union. So, I will be giving you a very short overview of Hungarian Soviet state security and especially intelligence relationship, and then I will turn to the real topic of my subject, which is, of course, these files I've already mentioned. When looking at the archival sources, I'm sorry, but I wasn't able to finish what I planned to do, which was to take a bigger look on these files from 1985 until 1990. But as you can see, the amount of material is quite big, so it's not that easy. The first three, or the 1985, 88, 89, these are the so-called information dossiers, in which material about a given subject was collected, which was deemed not too relevant for other things, but there was a separate folder for the Soviet Union. One here, 1983-89, that was one of the international relations files which the Interior Ministry held on state security matters. This was, as it turned out, mostly administrative stuff, but still very interesting information in there. And last but not least, the Moskva, which was a correspondence dossier between the first directorate of the KGB and the first directorate of the third main directorate of the Hungarian Interior Ministry, which was foreign intelligence. So very quickly about Soviet-Hungarian cooperation. Like elsewhere, it started early on, probably around the 1950s, with 1956 a major break. And of course, we have to mention that Andropov was ambassador back then in Budapest, so he didn't really like how things turned. But later on, he probably also had an important hand on dealing with Hungary as an important part of the Soviet sphere of influence. In 1964, there was an agreement between the two sides, which made the previous arrangements more permanent. Theoretically, in the previous decade, it was only of a temporary nature, but practically it was pretty permanent. But in 1964, this was sealed in an agreement. And of course, it was always a pretty central thing to these types of agreements that the two sides shouldn't work against each other, which is an interesting question. And in 1973, an operational group was established in Moscow. So this was a Soviet undertaking to be more equal. I'm not really sure what they did there, but it would be very interesting to know. What I would also emphasize is that the Hungarians in the 1980s also tried to have a very interesting ambassadorial announcement, and the former head of the Foreign Intelligence Service was sent to Moscow as an ambassador. So he had good relations on the diplomatic level, but also on the not so diplomatic level. And as far as we know from sources, the Soviet advisory mission in the Hungarian Interior Ministry lasted somewhere in the early parts of 1990. I'm not sure if anyone knows the exact date. And I mentioned here on the slide former Minister of the Interior Horvat's interview from 1993. He already back then said that back in the late 1980s, relations were not that smooth, and some documents weren't really sent to the Soviet advisors, and also from the military intelligence perspectives, there were some similar sentiments. So, and I thought this would also be interesting to our topic. And what I found in the administrative parts of the NKO's files was two lists of the Soviet delegation to the Interior Ministry. One from 1983 and one from 1988. As you can see, and it's somewhat a mystery for me, how 4 generals could be present with the permanent addresses in Budapest in 1983, but then again, they were listed. And also you can see that in 1988, the advisory group became more senior. So they already had 7 colonels and 2 majors. So the lieutenant colonels and the lieutenant disappeared somehow. What I found interesting when looking through the files, and these are, well, somewhat chaotic sometimes, was how the relations became intensive in the middle of the 1980s. So there were multiple high-level visits from Soviet state security. Even Viktor Cherbikov came to Hungary multiple times, and his wife also made holidays in Hungary. And Vladimir Kyuchkov spoke Hungarian, which somewhat surprised me. And he loved Hungarian cabaret because Hungarian state security gave him presents with Hungarian cabaret recordings, and this otherwise would have been not really logical. To the more serious side of things, I have found a short report on a Polish source informing the Hungarians that Jaruzelski was giving an order for the Polish representation in Moscow to make a report about this situation on the Soviet domestic field. This was handled as highly sensitive, and I'm not really sure how they got this information, but maybe our Polish colleagues will be interested in this, and we can find out more. Also, I found to my surprise that George Blake made a holiday in Hungary. So he came to a family reunion in Hungary, as it turned out. Yeah, I didn't know that. How do these materials look like? Well, as I said, they are pretty chaotic. Very often there is no source mentioned, and no paper trail on how these files were used. So it's really difficult to know how the administrative or analytical framework worked, but I'm pretty sure that these were read quite deeply. Why do I think it? Because the files are pretty voluminous, and there are a few mentions of using these files to higher analytical levels and also to some party organs. But that was pretty rare in these files to have a conclusive way of using them. Regarding the types, these were many times unclassified or classified materials from US sources, congressional testimonies, for example, on how the Soviets tried to influence the radio and other Western news coverage inside the Soviet Union, also reports to Congress about Soviet life, and especially interesting were DoD reports. These were those which I've seen open source, but still the reporting was interesting. What I found rather interesting was that the Hungarian intelligence people had a really interesting focus on social science in the West. So I found papers from two conferences, to be more precise, from the Second and Third World Congress of the Soviet and Eastern European Studies in Washington, which detailed in quite serious detail how Soviet, mostly Soviet, but also Eastern European societies are evolving, what problems are there. And these were really deep scientific papers, 20 to 30 pages with annexes, a list of sources. So I'm not really sure whether the analytical capacity was there to look this through properly, but they collected them methodically. And of course, there were a lot of reports from the different stations regarding specific Soviet-related topics, such as Gorbachev's how Gorbachev was perceived in the West, what moves were expected from different Western countries, etc., etc. So the usual stuff we can say. And the number of reports was pretty big. I didn't count them, but I would say that through these years, they were in the hundreds. And what was also interesting was that in these files, the counterintelligence stations, which was in Moscow, sent also reports back to Hungary. And the foreign intelligence kept these, also not exclusively from the Soviet Union, but also other friendly countries. For example, I came across a report from Havana in which Fidel Castro heavily criticized Gorbachev because of his late policies. So even such files were kept. And there were quite a few documents which I couldn't really typify because they were in probably Japanese language. I'm not really sure because I don't speak Japanese, but those were also quite voluminous reports. So it would be interesting to know what was contained in them. So jumping to the conclusions. As I said, this is a very preliminary thing which I was able to present to you, but it is for me highly interesting because it shows that Hungarian foreign intelligence had very interesting sources on how the Soviet domestic situation was developing. There are also hints that they somehow wanted to develop sources close to the Soviet Union or in friendly countries. the Polish report in this regard is very interesting. And also, this could be a form of explanation on why the Hungarian government's moves at the end of the 80s were perceived to be so bold, but they probably knew what problems the Soviets were facing and how the winds in Moscow were changing. And it would be very interesting to see how the intelligence/diplomatic channels work, but sadly, the ambassador / former intelligence chief died in the early 1990s, and he didn't really leave any information about his activities, so that's a dead end. And otherwise, also, it is very difficult to get oral history or other related confirmation of how these things work. The form in which the Hungarians collected the Soviet information was from the archival hierarchy, so to say, the lowest level. Information dossiers were pretty general things, but then again, it was very interesting for me to see. And as my time is up, I hope that you found my presentation interesting, and if I can, I will answer any questions gladly. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the introduction. So if we say that communism collapsed in Poland at the turn of 1989 and 1990, how this watershed moment in our history did impact the military intelligence? What kind of activities they were undertaken at that time, and especially how this situation was regarded in terms of Warsaw ties, secret intelligence ties with Moscow. So I divided my presentation into several parts. I will briefly describe the aims, research questions, and sources. Then I will show how the Polish military intelligence did operate with the GRU in the 2 last years of the People's Polish Republic. And then I will skip to go to the operational situation of the 1990. And I will also present this topic on 2 cases, on Sweden, Iraq, and then I will conclude it. When it comes to the aims and research questions, so how did the Polish military intelligence did navigate the changing international environment? When did Polish military intelligence stations stop to cooperate with the GRU in terms of meetings and exchanges of information, materials, or joint operations? And the time frame of my research is 1989-1990. And how these discussions might be framed into the notion as the Polish military intelligence as the long arm of the Soviets. So it's like research based mostly on archives, which are stored at the Institute of National Remembrance and which are like cross-check corroborated with the literature. So when you see this, when you look at this table, that's the cooperation between Polish and Soviet intelligence. And the rule was that the GRU were taking more than sharing with the Polish intelligence. There were only a few exceptions when they gave, these are the meetings, these are the materials which were received and shared. And these are the informations which are received and shared. And here we can see the evaluation of the cooperation with the made according to the Polish scholar system, which says 5 is very good, 1, 2, 3 is like not so good. So we can see that in most of the cases, these are the countries where those meetings took place. We can see that, for example, Norway, United States, or Great Britain, or even Lebanon, there were more this kind of meetings, and usually the Soviets were those who were demanding the documents, and they were very rarely sharing their information. There were many reasons for that, because every attaché, who was also chief of the military intelligence station, had to report about those meetings to Warsaw, to headquarters, and explain why, for example, the cooperation was good or why there were some limits in mutual exchanges of information. Nevertheless, as we can see, the cooperation was very good because still the station chiefs were sharing information, and the time frame, June 1989, it's not insignificant, is the time when the June 1989 half-free elections took part in Poland. So how this situation changed over several months? Of course, the end of communism in Poland, 1990, the Polish United Worker Party was dissolved. The communists, former communists, they transformed into social democrats, or they use the language as they identified themselves as leftist. Even before the elections of 1989, there were no terms used within the campaign as communism or Marxist-Leninism, because I did my research when I was working on Polish hardliners within the Communist Party, and I was looking for real communists, those who didn't reject the communists, who truly believed to communism in 1989, and I did not find anyone. So there was a change in language. But there is one very important factor: Poland as a member of Warsaw Pact. There was still a Warsaw Pact, and that did have a huge impact on how the military intelligence was running its operation, and also designing threats, aims, and objectives. But the Ministry of Defense was in 1990 controlled by the same people who were in power in the 80s. So contrary to the civilian intelligence, we did some kind of a screening, limited, but there was some kind of screening. Within the military intelligence, there was no any vetting procedures, screening whatsoever. So, of course, there were some organizational and structural changes. They changed, transformed some names and so on, but the people usually remain the same. Those who did lose their posts, that was not because of some kind of a screening, that they were just going into retirement, which meant that they left the place for the people who were trained by them. So, of course, if there was a Warsaw Pact and the Ministry of Defense was still controlled by the same people, the main objectives of the military intelligence did not change. So NATO was still, of course, perceived as enemy. For example, by the report from the military intelligence station in Belgium. And there were, of course, the changes within the international situation, the unification of Germany. And this unification of Germany, you can see the Polish document on the right, even triggered the military intelligence to enhance human intelligence operations within Germany, to expand those operations, to recruit more sources who would provide information about the shifting situation. What also is striking is that the military intelligence sometimes use the same language as in the 80s. For example, in the report from March 1990, when there was no Polish United Workers' Party, when the communism has collapsed, the officers, they were still using comrades, Bulgarian comrades or Russian or Soviet comrades or Romanian comrades, and so on and so on. So we can see that it was very hard for them to adjust to the very quickly changing situation. And we also can see that by deconstructing the main aims of several stations, intelligence stations. For example, in 1990, the main task for residency codenamed Statua in the US was monitoring NATO preparations for an attack against Poland and the Warsaw Pact. Of course, this kind of assessment of the situation derived also from multiple efforts conducted by the Western intelligence services to recruit Polish officers. And we did have this kind of operations run in 1990, and some of them were successful. Not all of them were revealed. because of this overlapping time when some of the files are declassified, some are still classified, but some of the operations were still successful, others failed and were reported to Warsaw, which also perpetuated this notion of the West as still hostile to Poland. For example, but we can see some changes where Warsaw instructed its military intelligence residency, codename Ornak in Norway, that they can still cooperate with the GRU, but they should not reveal their interests to the Soviets. So first case, Sweden. Of course, Polish military intelligence had very fruitful contact with its GRU counterpart. They were meeting held in private homes, for example, 5 meetings in 1979. They did also coordinate of field trips to infiltrate, to take some pictures of the military facilities. For example, in 1984, they just agreed that Polish officers would travel to southern and western part of Sweden, while Soviet would operate in the north. And the last meeting between the representative of military intelligence of Poland and Soviet Union in Sweden took place in November 1990 at the GRU's request, but there was also the change of climate between them, because usually they used to meet at the secure room within the embassy, Soviet embassy, of course. But this time the meeting took place at the hotel in Stockholm between Deputy Military Attaché Igor Sergun and Marek Wojtala, codename Harald, and they were trying to see the both of them tried to get some kind of information about the situation within their countries. Sergun probed Polish officer about the sentiment within the Polish armed forces and also expressed interest in the political situation. He also expressed concern about the lack of constructive dialogue between Poland and the USSR regarding the new situation in Europe following German reunification, as reported by Wojtala. Polish officer in turn tried to gauge Sergun's opinions on the situation in the Soviet armed forces. So it was like a mutual approach that has changed from brotherly cooperation towards more restrained contacts. The second case is Iraq. Actually, in Iraq, the Polish military intelligence officer who was in charge of the residency was very close to its Soviet counterpart. He even arranged a meeting with alleged CIA officer Michael Pixley on behalf of the Soviets, because they wanted to know more about this CIA guy. And the Polish officer maintained also frequent contact with Soviets, Cuban and Chinese attaché. However, his approach toward the West also changed a little bit when he was approached by the Japanese first secretary, who wanted his help in evaluating and assessing where the Japanese citizens were held as human shield by the Iraqi forces. And he was agreed to meet, but Warsaw declined him meeting his military attaché. What is also striking that even in December 1990, the chief of the military station in Baghdad requested several times Warsaw for permission to share with the Soviets very detailed maps of Baghdad, which were designed, prepared by the Polish specialists working there in the 80s. And he was like very often asking Warsaw if he can just, share this information with the Soviets, because it would make Soviets happy. And the same maps were shared by the civilian intelligence with the CIA, and they were used also for preparing the Operation Desert Storm. And there is one side story, very spectacular, Operation Friendly Saddam, when Polish civilian intelligence rescued and helped to escape several CIA and DIA assets from Iraq in 1990. And it's not coincidence that this operation was run by the civilian intelligence rather than the military. Military were kept in the dark. So to conclude, when we evaluate the cooperation between Polish intelligence and the GRU, we can see that the establishment of the Mazowiecki government after the June 1989 elections did not impact mutual relations. information sharing did continue in 1990, though generally on a smaller scale, but this also was influenced by the budget cuts. So there were fewer meetings with Warsaw Pact military intelligence. They had less money on foreign trips, and usually this budget cuts and this smaller scale of cooperation did not come from ideological perspective. What was also, to some extent, new, it was used the Soviet diplomats as sources. For example, in Kuwait, Polish military intelligence used Soviet diplomat. Since early mid-1990, we can identify more restrained GRU approach, though this varied by specific residencies and the personal ties between their chiefs. There were fewer contacts, fewer meetings. Also, this situation was influenced by the internal situation within the Soviet Union, so they didn't know how the situation would develop. And in December 1990, the chief resident of the GRU residency in Belgium wrote that the cooperation between the Warsaw Pact had naturally been frozen. We can also see some new approaches towards the West, as from the report from late 90s, that cooperation with the Soviet attaché is very useful, although the distinction in our relations with the attaché of the Soviet Union, France and Great Britain is becoming blurred in terms of openness in the exchange of views. So there was a small change. But also what is significant here is that since 1991, the headquarters in Warsaw introduced new guidelines for intelligence work in the West. So according to Warsaw, Polish military intelligence should be less offensive, more data should be gleaned from open sources, and there are some kind of hints, instruction to limit human intelligence operations. Of course, at that time, there was also enhancements of Polish military counterintelligence towards Russian citizens. Operation Taiga ran from September 1990. And when we try to conclude this relationship, back to the title of my presentation, we can see that in 1990, Polish military and GRU were not enemies. They were sometimes good friends, but usually just colleagues. Still, relations were very cordial, though occasionally more restrained. In other words, they were no longer brothers, more like distant relatives, but still maintaining a close relationship. And the West NATO was still perceived as a military threat. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I'm grateful to the organizers of this conference for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here in Warsaw again, and for the first time actually at the Institute for National Remembrance. It's obviously a great pleasure to be in the premises of an institution which is doing so much to encourage the study of intelligence and security. The title of the conference, though, is a surprising one. The intermarium is a very strange way of describing the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. Certainly if you're a historian of modern Europe, as I am. These are not the countries of the intermarium. These are not the countries that lie between the Baltic and the Adriatic. The Baltic and the Adriatic are not important seas. They are not important to political history. These are the countries which lie between the German Reich and the Russian Empire. That is what a historian notices. And that is what a historian of Cold War Europe notices. These are the countries which lie between the Soviet Union, the Russian Empire reborn, and the Bundesrepublik Deutschland. That is what this presentation is about. And of course, for the Soviet Union and for the KGB, the GDR was fundamentally different from the other satellites. The other satellites, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, they were Hungary, they were very similar to Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. They were essentially republics within the Soviet Union itself. They weren't technically within the Soviet Union, but they were still under the rule of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and the Poles were basically the Latvians under another name. The Hungarians were basically the Lithuanians under another name, The Czechoslovaks were basically the Lithuanians under another name. They were just part of the communist empire run by the CPSU, which had taken over the Russian empire. They were equivalent to the satellites. That's how they saw it. The GDR was fundamentally different. It was not part of the Soviet Union. It was part of Germany. And it was the core of the Soviet Union's German policy. And there, of course, was the chief administrator of their German policy, Walter Ulbricht, the first and, frankly, only capable leader of the GDR. That's what my presentation is about. Well, you can see I've put here, towards the end, extraordinary facts about the GDR. The size of the GDR's, the KGB residency in East Berlin in the late 60s was that's just East Berlin. Just the residency was 450 officers. In the other satellites, the KGB had 15 to 20. The residency in Karlshorst was itself 20 times larger. And there were further KGB offices in the provinces of the GDR. One of them, of course, being that there he is, looking as always like a malevolent newt, is Vladimir Putin. It had more. It was well over 20 times the size. And so it was throughout the entire Cold War. The GDR was totally special. I put another fact here. Again, so I put it here, the KGB residency in East Berlin. And here you see the GDR's foreign intelligence establishment at the end of the regime. So the Hauptverwaltung with 4,744 officers. Well, that's itself, the Hauptverwaltung, just the Stasi's foreign intelligence department, was more than twice the size of Britain's celebrated secret intelligence service. And the security divisions of the Stasi also, quite extraordinarily, and no historian really mentions this save myself, the security divisions also ran spies in the Federal Republic of Germany, where foreign intelligence had their own foreign intelligence services. Another 2,300 officers ran them, making 7,000. And the GDR had its own military intelligence service, which ran another 1,200 at the end. So 8,000, the foreign intelligence staff of the Stasi running human spies in 1989 was 8,200 people, which is well over 3.5 times the size of Britain's celebrated secret intelligence service. It was massive. The GDR was a kind of equivalent as a partner to the Soviet Union, the KGB, as Britain as a partner to the CIA. It wasn't a small power. It was a medium-sized power in intelligence terms. That's what it was all about. That's what this presentation is about, the special status of the GDR. And the GDR was special because it was part of Germany. And that's how the KGB saw it. When the KGB looked at Eastern Europe, and this is there's Oleg Kalugin, whose memoir, Spy Master, is a super memoir. It's really excellent. And I met him in the CIA conference. We talked at the CIA conference, this was in Berlin. This was 25 years ago. This is 1999. I remember talking to him about his memoir then. And then he is, of course, in front of the Lubyanka. And he made the same points to me then as he made to me, as he makes in his memoir. I raised them. He makes 2 points. He says, and I'll quote from his book, "We had an extraordinarily close relationship with Wolf and East Germans. Nowhere in the world did the KGB have an operation like that in East Germany. In East Berlin alone, our station numbered some 450 officers, dozens and dozens more were scattered about East Germany's provinces. Most Eastern European countries only had about 15 to 20 KGB officers. Our East Berlin station acquired the status of a regular KGB directorate. It was treated as a full directorate of the KGB. It was so important. We could never dictate to the East Germans as we did with such Warsaw Pact countries as Bulgaria." So the first thing he says, this was utterly extraordinary, because Germany was utterly extraordinary. And the way the KGB saw Germany is, for the first half of the Cold War, until the mid-60s, late 60s, the KGB still hoped that Germany would be reunited under communist leadership. So it was still thinking of the German Reich, and that the German Reich would go communist. Lenin's dream realized. There would be a communist Europe. Cold War ended in one blow. The whole of Europe turns communist. That's the importance of Germany. That's why it was so important. That's why they built it up so fast. And then, of course, they realized the remarkable economic comeback of the Federal Republic and its political stabilization under Konrad Adenauer, and its incorporation into the West under Adenauer. It realized that then Adenauer turned the Federal Republic, the German Reich died, and Adenauer turned the Federal Republic into part of the West. It westernized. And then, of course, the KGB changed its mind and saw the Federal Republic as a very important part of the West. But that still made it very, very important. It regarded it as a kind of United States surrogate in Europe. But that still makes it special. And it makes it totally different. Of course, that makes the GDR very important and very different from the other satellites. It's how you can penetrate the West. And that's how it's all. So Germany, the KGB changed its mind. It goes from being the German Reich, as it were, and the GDR is its way of dividing the German Reich and trying to take it over. And then it becomes its way of penetrating the West. And the second thing that Kalugin says is the Hauptverwaltung was an outstanding agency. As for NATO's strongest power, he writes, West Germany, we also had access to huge quantities of intelligence and virtually without lifting a finger. The East German Foreign Intelligence Agency, headed by the brilliant Markus Wolf, had so deeply penetrated the West German government military and secret services that about all we had to do was lie back and stay out of Wolf's way. KGB intelligence naturally had close ties with the secret services of all the fraternal countries of Eastern Europe, though none would be as fruitful as our relationship with East Germany and the Wolf. So it was totally special. So that, and in fact, you remember, if you're British and looking at it, there are, when they write about it, as Kalugin does, it is reminiscent of how British historians used to write about India in the days of the British Empire, the crown jewel of the British Empire. And the GDR and the AFA were just the crown jewel of what they are. One thing the historians leave out, though, is that this works both ways. That just because the GDR was very good for penetrating the West, and Wolf therefore was an outstanding and brilliant officer, so the West could do the same, or if it was any good, it could do the same to the GDR. It was the most vulnerable of all the satellites, which means that counterintelligence was very, very important. And though they provided very little information to the HVA, there was substantial information exchange between the two. But overwhelmingly, it came from the HVA. Very little was the KGB. But of course, the KGB had a very strong incentive to supply counterintelligence. Because, of course, the GDR faced a very serious danger of infiltration by Western secret services. So it did. And therefore, they wiped out, here I put them here, they wiped out, and it was really the KGB's success rather than the Stasi's. They turned the Stasi very successfully into a very fine counterintelligence agency. There's probably never been a better counterintelligence agency than the Stasi. And they did this in the 1950s when they're dealing with, they were training up very young men in their early mid-20s with very little education. And they turned them into an excellent counterintelligence agency within about 10 years. But the core of the information that was driving this, certainly to start with, was the KGBs. So their great operations of the 50s, the big operations, 1953 and 1955, was fueled by information from three agents: Heinz Welfer in the Bundesnachrichtendienst, who was a KGB source; Kim Philby in the British Secret Intelligence Service, who was a KGB source; and George Blake in the British Secret Intelligence Service, who, like I was, a KGB source. They were so proud of it, of course, that they even celebrated it. They were so proud of this, and the Stasi took this up as part of its self-image. In 1963, it was a big success throughout the entire Soviet bloc. They even released a film for eyes only, Streng Geheim, produced by DEFA, the Deutsche Filmaktiengesellschaft, and which was a big hit throughout the Soviet bloc, and was based on a real story of penetration of an American military intelligence unit down in Würzburg in Bavaria, and to celebrate the Stasi's success, the transformation of the Stasi into a very successful counterintelligence service. Myself, I applied to the BSD, the Bundesbeauftragte für die Stasi-Unterlagen, and they gave me, and I published, and I have published this document that shows the importance of George Blake. George Blake actually destroyed British agents' networks in the GDR twice, not just in 53 to 55. They gave me this, Hinweise zum sowjetischen Kundschafter im britischen Geheimdienst George Blake, and they give examples of the spies, and it says that here in 1958 to 1961, Blake identified another 100 spies in the GDR working for the Britain's Secret Intelligence Service, and those people, of course, will have been executed, showing just how destructive a spy he was. but that shows the counterintelligence support given to the Stasi by the KGB. So then we have this extraordinary residency, the status of a full KGB directorate, doing something which the others didn't do. In most of the Eastern European states, most of the bloc states, the KGB team, the KGB residencies there, did not organize their own espionage. All they did was liaise with the local security and intelligence agencies. They didn't run agent networks of their own, but a major focus of the KGB's work from East Berlin was running spies. And here are some of their famous spies. Well, there's the most famous. Heinz Felfer, penetrating and basically doing serious harm to the Bundesnachrichtendienst there. So they obviously handled, a lot of what they were doing was counterintelligence, protecting the Soviet armed forces. I've listed it there. They also reported it on the GDR. And the interesting thing, I've compared what has been revealed in the Matrokhin archive about their reporting with what the Stasi was reporting to Honecker. And it's clear that in the 1970s, the KGB had a much more realistic view of the state of public opinion in the GDR than the Stasi was ever allowed to pass on to Honecker. The KGB was telling, the KGB in East Berlin was telling the KGB in Moscow in the mid-70s, at least 500,000 East Germans don't want a communist regime in East Germany. Well, the Stasi never told Honecker that at the same time. So the KGB had a much more clear-eyed view. They reported, and the reason was their Operation Lutsch, which was to monitor public opinion in the GDR. They were so worried about it, they saw full well that the loyalty of East Germans was limited to the regime, and it was so important to them to hold on to East Germany. They monitored it very, very carefully. And they also, of course, ran their own agent networks, very famously Felfer, but they ran their own agent network based on illegals. You've heard a little about their illegals. They sent illegals into West Germany, and a lot of the real illegals, let's say the people under false identities, they didn't stay in West Germany. They used West Germany's integration into the West as a way of infiltrating the United States or Canada, moving into North America, moving into Britain. That's how they did it. And the refugees, the people who weren't fully illegals, they got jobs in West Germany, and of course we found out from the Matrokhin archive some of who these people were, and they penetrated. What Matrokhin shows is the KGB wanted information of all kinds from West Germany. But what it shows, they really devastatingly penetrated with their own spies West Germany's companies, and they looted West Germany's companies. And there's no assessment, of course, we still don't know how much, but Vladimir Kryuchkov estimated the value of this information to the Soviet economy and war economy at tens of billions of dollars. Of course, what they wanted was the information that the HVA obtained. I talked about this in Langland 2 years ago, so their military intelligence collection was fabulous. The GDR's military intelligence collection was more important to the Warsaw Pact than the GDR's armed forces. They supplied about 80% of all the information gathered by the Soviet bloc on West Germany and NATO. They were looting NATO with their human spies. About 30% of all the intelligence supplied by the Hauptverwaltung, which went directly to the KGB residency in Karlshorst, it went, of course, to the Stasi as well, but it went directly from Stasi collection departments through to Karlshorst, was military intelligence. And there was very close cooperation in scientific intelligence. Another point made is that Sud, which was the Soviet bloc's record, their intelligence record of personnel of Western intelligence agencies, of the 188,000 entries in Sud, 74,000 came from the Stasi. So around about 40 to 45%. About 65% of all reports received from all the Soviet bloc's intelligence and security services in the mid-70s came from the Stasi, and chiefly the Hauptverwaltung Aufklärung. So it stood out above, it was head and shoulders above the rest. Absolutely head and shoulders above the rest. Indeed, they were so worried about it, it was so successful that in actual fact, one of the great ironies is the Stasi, the Hauptverwaltung, ended up spying on the KGB. So one of the funny things, and it's very entertaining. In the late 60s, Brezhnev, I've put him here, chuckling with Honecker, and Andropov is chuckling. Well, Brezhnev and Andropov decided to work behind Honecker's back, and they decided to establish a back channel to Willy Brandt, who clearly had a new foreign policy, which was going to run by Andropov and the KGB. And Andropov and the KGB set it up. But of course, it was running to Bar in Bonn, Egon Bar, and the Hauptbefehl and Aufklärung had put Bar under surveillance. They even put microphones into his house. So whenever he had dealings with KGB officers, then the Stasi actually recorded cooperation, those contacts, and they've had information about the KGB's contacts with Bar, and thus with Punt, which the KGB didn't want it to have, and the KGB finally tipped off Bar in order to cut that flow of information. So the Stasi was even spying on the S. That's how good it was. There was even the Stasi was so impressed that it even encouraged Aufklärung to expand its network in the wider world, with some resistance from the Aufklärung, which had a strong focus on Eastern Europe. So my conclusion here is, what is very clear, 35 years after the Stasi collapsed and the GDR collapsed, is that it stood head and shoulders above the intelligence and security agencies of the bloc in its importance to the Soviet Union. But the reason for that was the importance, first, of Germany in Soviet policy towards Europe. For as long as the Soviet Union thought that there was a chance the German Reich might be reconstituted and thus that it could govern. But then when it was clear that in the mid-60s that wasn't going to happen, and that the Federal Republic had stabilized and was there permanently, then Aufklärung was its instrument for infiltrating West Germany and turning it into a source of intelligence for itself, which was a job performed with admirable success by that service. Thank you.
About Bulgarian foreign and military intelligence and its ties with the Soviet intelligence in Warsaw Pact operations vis-a-vis NATO. So I would like to say that I am a historian and a lawyer. I am not a specialist in intelligence services, but I'm very much interested in the relations during the Cold War between East and West, and in this context, in this framework, I'm touching upon today the topic about cooperation or lack of cooperation between the Bulgarian intelligence services and Soviet military intelligence in the framework of the Warsaw Pact. So let me start with some historical introduction, saying that in mid-1940s through 1989, intelligence gathering in the Soviet bloc was dominated by the two primary Soviet intelligence organs. This is the State Security Committee, KGB, and the main intelligence directorate, GRU, of the Soviet General Staff. The KGB and the GRU exercised broad control over the other Warsaw Pact intelligence services, as it was shown in most of the presentations until now, including Bulgaria's agencies, whose activities, apart from certain areas of military intelligence supervised by the GRU, were coordinated by the 11th Department of the KGB's first main directorate, the directorate that oversaw Soviet foreign intelligence. Let me begin by commenting about the sources available to study this topic. In the early 1990s, researchers have given access to the Central State Archive in Bulgarian Centralny Državny Archiv, located in the Sofia City Center, where I had the chance to work in the beginning of my career. And this archive holds extremely important records for the entire era from 1944 through 1989, including the records of the Bulgarian Communist Party. Access and working conditions at the Central State Archive in Sofia have been excellent for foreign scholars as well as Bulgarian citizens. The Bulgarian Communist Party Politburo files and papers of the long-time leader of the Bulgarian Communist Party, Todor Živkov, in office from 1954 until 1989, contain intelligence documents that went to the highest leaders. These are extremely useful, but they are only a small part of the huge quantities of intelligence documents that were produced by Bulgarian agencies. Initially, researchers had no direct access to the huge collections of Bulgarian Communist-era foreign intelligence service, which until 1990 was overseen by the State Security Service. It's called in Bulgarian Državna sigurnost, or DSE, and Bulgaria's Communist-era military intelligence service overseen by the Bulgarian General Staff. However, the situation changed in 2007 when the Bulgarian government set up a commission to declassify documents and disclose the affiliation of Bulgarian citizens with the State Security Service and the military intelligence service in the Bulgarian National Army. This commission, usually known simply as COMDOS, has been functioning in downtown Sofia ever since, overseeing a central archive that enables scholars and journalists and everybody who is interested in this, in the archives collections there, to explore the operational records of the Bulgarian state security and the Bulgarian military intelligence service, including records pertaining to the Warsaw Pact. Other crucial records connected with Bulgarian Communist-era military intelligence records can be found in the State Military Historical Archive, which is located in the city of Veliko Trnovo, old Bulgarian capital. And this archive is accessible for researchers today, though it's not as user-friendly as the Central State Archive and the COMDOS archive, which I mentioned already. In the former USSR, large quantities of formerly top-secret documents are now available that give a good sense of the scale and nature of KGB and GRU intelligence ties with Bulgaria. No access has ever been given to the Russian Foreign Intelligence Archive in Yasenovo or the Russian Military Intelligence Archive in Moscow. However, some important KGB and GRU documents are available in the former Ukrainian KGB archive in Kiev. I had a chance to take a few research trips to Kiev and to use the invaluable collections in the KGB archive in Kiev before the war. And also, there are also documents at the former KGB archives in the Baltic republics and Moldova. Unfortunately, I never had a chance to use those archives up to now. More importantly, the COMDOS archive contains large quantities of documents from the Soviet intelligence services that are accessible to researchers in Sofia, even though they are off limits in Russia. Among the valuable tasks COMDOS, that commission, has performed is the compilation and online publication of immense quantities of intelligence documents, organized thematically and chronologically. Several dozen thematic collections of documents have been posted, each numbering roughly 600 pages, and each of these has been supplemented a much larger annex numbering thousands of pages, and everything is available online. This includes also among the collections, we find numerous collections relating to the Warsaw Pact and Bulgaria's operations with Soviet intelligence agencies. These collections are invaluable in their own right, and they also give important guidance for researchers to explore the topics even more fully. As a result, scholarship on Bulgaria's intelligence role in the Warsaw Pact is eminently feasible despite the lack of access to intelligence archives in Russia. Until 1989, the role of Bulgarian foreign intelligence and military intelligence agencies was especially important for the Warsaw Pact in the Balkans, focusing on NATO members Turkey and Greece. Some of these operations occurred in cooperation with the KGB and GRU, but most were undertaken separately. Bulgaria's main contributions to Warsaw Pact intelligence operations were through intelligence gathering activities in NATO countries, especially in Turkey and in Greece, in neighboring Balkan countries, Yugoslavia at that time, Albania, and in some neutral or non-allied countries as Yugoslavia again, Albania, Austria, and Cyprus. A great deal of controversy has surrounded Bulgarians' role in covert operations, special tasks, and active measures. And in my the presentation, I have a few cases like Georgi Marcus assassination. A great deal of documentation is available showing how the assassination was carried out. By the they that there are books that present many of the key documents that were published. Long-standing allegations of state security involvement in attempt to assassinate the Pope also didn't prove, even by the documents, even though a great deal of circumstantial evidence tends to point to state security involvement. There is no convincing documentation confirming this. On the contrary, the existing documentation tends to show that the state security was not involved, even though the Soviet KGB may have been, but it has to be proved. In 2018, declassified Bulgarian Communist Party documents revealed, for example, a state security plan to foment crisis between Turkey and Greece in 1971. The idea of the planned operation with the codenamed Cross was that the Bulgarian secret agents would set fire to the patriarchate of Constantinople in Istanbul and make it look like the work of Turks. The declassified documents state that, quote, intervention, so-called intervention in the religious entity would have, quote, significantly damaged Turkish-Greek relations and force the United States to choose one side in the ensuing crisis. And I have a lot of documents with me. I even was able to translate some of them in order to show some cases. But I would say that the state security plans to conduct active measures against Greece and Turkey were aiming, as it was stated in documents, quote, to put the enemy in a position of delusion. So that plan was developed by the 7th Department of the Bulgarian State Security First Main Directorate and was affirmed by the deputy head of the directorate in November 1917 and approved. The operation was supposed to be prepared by the middle of 1971 and then implemented, but it was abandoned. So just one of the many cases of operations undertaken undertaken against Greece and Turkey as members of NATO. When it comes to the cooperative efforts between Bulgarian, Soviet and Bulgarian intelligence services, I would say that there may be at least two main aspects. One is increasing centralization of efforts under Soviet Warsaw Pact structures in 1970s and 1980s. Formal leadership organs were established. Also, there were specific cooperation agreements updated periodically. They were foreign intelligence so-called games, Bulgaria vis-a-vis Turkey and Greece. They were mutual efforts to determine NATO rules of engagement along the southern flank through state security provocations, etc., etc. So there are many documents that are dated not only in 1970s, as I mentioned, but also I have a very important document that serves as like a program for cooperation, and is dated from 1959 between Soviet intelligence and Bulgarian state security intelligence. So with this, I think I should close my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very, very much. Now, all the members of the panel are asked to sit there because you'll be answering questions. And I'm going to ask the first three. Dobrze, ale na początku ja myślę, że...
Jest tu. Sorry about that. I mean, I don't have a file. I want to get so many questions.
I can move very far away. Right. Is that what I'm taking? I'm going to use and abuse my position by asking first very short three questions. Paul, could you tell us if what was the impact of Werner Stiller's defection to the West in 1979? Because in my opinion, the KGB team in Berlin wasn't touched. Shumilov was there until 1987. He came in 1976. Did it really touch the Russians in Berlin? Nadia, I have a question. In a book written by the best KGB Arabist, Kirpichenko, he had a small chapter about the relationship with the so-called Eastern European intelligence services. And in that book, he says, there was only one problem with the Bulgarians. They argued that they loved us more than we loved them. Now, in the book of your General Vandov, who was one of the chief anti-Turkey operator, there are several photos which would suggest that that was true. And the last question to János, my Polish colleagues tell me that after 1991, just for the sake of argument, there were only two intelligence managers who were fired. One was Bednash and another was Makowski. Przemek obviously knows more about this. How did you clean your intelligence service? Thank you very much. Any other questions? Sorry, here one, there one.
There one.
So I can't hear you, the lights.
I got a microphone, so I use the monopoly.
Go ahead, man. Go ahead.
I mean, once I have it.
Be my guest.
May I? Yeah. Okay, so to Paul. about Bar Kevorkov, the KGB back channel to the federal government in Germany, West Germany. We had a conference in Washington in 2003 where I had both of them there, and I'm pretty sure that there was no listening device in Bar's apartment. What was monitored was, I think the Stasi, as well as the Americans, had probably the chance to monitor his phone conversations, but he was aware of that. And I'm pretty sure that both Kevorkov and Bar were pretty clear that the talks they had were secret, except that Bar told the Americans that he had talks with Kevorkov, Kissinger, whereas Kissinger told him, I have my own back channel, Dobrynin. I'm not sure whether they talked about details about that, but the fact that he had it was known to the Americans. Whether the Stasi had really any knowledge about what, except maybe for the fact that it happened, that what was said there, I would almost completely exclude that the Stasi had any detailed knowledge of what those two talked to each other when they met.
I'm Wolfgang Krieger from University of Marburg. I have a question for Paul Maddrell. If, as you suggested, and if I understood rightly, GDR intelligence supplied some 80% of what was known about Western Europe or the West, what was the purpose of having 450 or some more Soviet KGB officers in East Berlin? I mean, all you needed was a couple of dozen people who would sort of transmit the knowledge, the information, the documents of the Stasi to the center in Moscow. What were they all doing, these 450-something people?
Also short, I hope it works, a short comment, Paul. First story about the intermarium. The term is from the interwar period, so it is okay. You can discuss if we can use it to the situation in the Cold War. So this is one. And also the famous British historian Stephen Dorrell in his book, MI6 something, I don't remember now the full title, he also used the term. And so that's why we decided also to use the term as one of the terms in our title of our conference. That's a short explanation. But generally, I agree with you. And also looking through the perspective of the Polish intelligence files, the most important source of very important information were actually East Germans. And it's also comparing with the other communist intelligence sources. They are also from the perspective of Warsaw. They are. It can be seen that they have very, very good sources of information in the West. So in this general sense, I completely agree with you, except one thing, because you went too far when saying that Germany was only one exception with the whole bloc. That it wasn't that easy, especially after 1956. And for example, the Poles have a biggest problem with the Germans, and Moscow wanted from Polish intelligence to send, for example, the agents to the States, because theoretically, from the perspective of Moscow, Poles have the beautiful source of information in the form of the Polish minority, 6 million of Poles living in the States. But instead, Poles send their agents to Germany against the will of Russia, because Poles were afraid of what you just told us, that the Russian will finally agree for a reunification of the Germany. That's why Poland would actually regain the independence in 1956. Still, we don't want the independence, because without Russia, there is no independence, no Polish borders. So that's why it's better to be in the Warsaw Pact still. So this is more complicated picture than you give us at the very beginning of your talk. But generally, I agree with you.
There's a gentleman at the very end, and I think it's going to be the last question, unless somebody is really keen to participate some more.
Thank you. I'm still Tomasz Sniegon from Lund University. Thank you. I have a question concerning Hungary and the cooperation with the KGB, and a specific case when the case of Peňkovský in 1962, where Greville Wynne was captured in Budapest. And I would be curious if there is any documentation, because I spent 3 months in Budapest last year at Open Society Archives, but I wasn't able to find some documentation, evidence or so in contact with the archive in Budapest. Do you know anything about this case, documented or accessible documents in Budapest, please? Thank you.
All right, this is it, Paul. We'll start with you.
Thank you. Yeah, and also I'm going to forget these 4 questions if I know. So they're Werner Stiller and the size of the residency, and Kevorkov, and this comment about how different they were. So in order, Werner Stiller, not particularly important. He's only important, really. His importance lies in 2 facts. One, he was of psychological value to the West Germans. He was a West German success. And West Germany's experience in the Cold War was of more or less consistent failure, certainly from the late 60s, for 20 years. So he's of psychological benefit to the West Germans. And of course, he identifies Wolf. And of course, he betrays some fairly important spies. And he shows that a lot of them, they were spying for money. So there wasn't that much. So the ideology was a relatively small much. So he shows that, but not much more. Frankly, it's a small dent in the Hauptverwaltungsaufklärung success. So he's not particularly important. Secondly, the Kevorkov, where the Stasi had its microphones is disputed, but that everyone claims Kevorkov claims the KGB that the Stasi placed microphones. Wolf and Fischer claim that the Stasi placed microphones. So precisely where the Stasi placed his microphones is uncertain and disputed, but everyone seems to agree the Stasi did place microphones and they've intercepted some of that flow. So the Stasi was spying on the KGB. Which again, the way the circularity of these things is characteristic of intelligence. So the Stasi, they certainly did extremely well. They were a very fine service. And really, what I draw from that is they still can't believe that they lost. They did so well that they're when you read their memoirs, there's a tone of disbelief. How could we do so well and lose? And lose twice. Their state collapsed, and Gorbachev abandoned them to prosecution. They ended up before West German court. So there is a state of disbelief and that's what I get from it. They really thought they were doing very, very well. Thirdly, the size of the residency, Wolfgang Krieger's question, yes. One could actually take Wolfgang Krieger's question even further. Why did they need such an enormous staff when these Germans were doing so well? And remember, most of that staff was based in Berlin-Karlshorst. It was only very rarely the KGB officer responsible for scientific and technological intelligence cooperation. He was based in the Normannstrasse. He was actually in the Normannstrasse sifting through the technology and telling these Germans, we want more of this, we want more of this. And one can see what he was doing. The others were basically monitoring the East Germans, and of course they had passes allowing them to go to the Normannstrasse at any time, whereas these Germans didn't have passes to go to Karlshorst at any time. It was a totally one-sided relationship. So to a considerable degree, what the Russians were doing was supervising the East Germans and duplicating really their work. But of course, the qualification to that is that Matrokhin actually supplies, it's one of the weaknesses of the book, Matrokhin shows that there was an enormous KGB intelligence effort from East Berlin against West Germany and through West Germany, the whole of the West. What I have learned from my now coming up to 25 years of researching in the Stasi's archives, and I published this to some extent in a book called The Image of the Enemy some 10 years ago. What I have learned is just how valuable Western integration was to the Stasi. Because the West Germans received loads of information which was just given to them by the Americans or for the IMF or the World Bank. West Germany joined every international organization, liaised very close with the American government, was a very close partner of the American government. You knew a lot what the American government was doing. The British government told it loads of stuff. All of this vast flow of information went from Bonn or from wherever it was, Wiesbaden, went to East Berlin and to Moscow, and they cleared out the West, frankly, through Western integration. And that's the information flow that is being processed there. That's what I've learned. So there's this enormous intelligence effort But we know relatively little from the Metrokin archive about what the KGB got. We know about its S&TI collection, but much less about the rest. So Metrokin clearly didn't have access to that. It's a weakness of that book, and someone, if Vladislav Bulhak, in 10 years' time gets access to the KGB's Foreign Intelligence Archive, I recommend that he hot-foot it to those records because he'll find plenty there. So the last one was Vladislav's own. Yes, it's an interesting point that you make, Vladislav, but what you're still saying is, okay, the Poles could have been used to penetrate the United States in the way that the East Germans used to penetrate the West Germans, but they can't have been much good then because the East Germans did it a lot better. You can use it. The East Germans could just they can't have been that good. Even you can use it, but the HVA is still different, and the GDR is still different, and the reason it's different is part of German.
My question about steel letter, yes or no will do.
No, I said that at the beginning. I said it not particularly important.
Okay, thank you.
Not particularly important.
Nadia.
So it was a comment and a question about the relations in terms of on the relationship. So I would say that yes, the relationship between the Bulgarian intelligence services and the Soviet intelligence service was extremely close. And but I don't know about this love story. Who loved more whom? But
recently published a book,
it's a very
KGB in Bulgaria.
Yeah, well. There were a few books about Bulgarian. It's very popular now to write books on these very topics because they're so important, especially now when Bulgaria is member of NATO and the European Union. But yes, during the Cold War, relations, as I mentioned, starting from immediately after the early 50s and up to even 1989, I found documents from late 1987 when relations were put in were very close, and Bulgarian intelligence services were very skillfully used by Soviet intelligence services, especially in the areas where Soviet intelligence services couldn't act, or it wasn't appropriate to act. So Bulgarian services were used. And also in the documents it stated that Bulgarian services, for example, if they would recruit an agent and this agent wasn't of interest for Bulgarian services, then they would ask, for example, Soviet services, are you interested, in other words, and helping this way to Soviet intelligence to work in the areas where Soviet intelligence couldn't, or again wasn't appropriate politically or by to get involved themselves. And also, in order to be more helpful, Bulgarian, in the documents, there are a lot of indication that Bulgarian agents were asking for more training, for more literature, in order to be much better prepared, and also to were requiring mutual programs, and also, as I said, there were mutual agreements for cooperation, no matter in which stage in the Cold War, during the Cold War, those agreements were signed.
Thank you. János.
If it's no problem, I begin with the second question because I have a very short answer. No, I don't know anything. And I also worked in the 1970s and later, so I'm not really familiar with the files from that time, but maybe Professor Barát Magda could help you on there. Regarding the question on how Hungarian intelligence was reformed, well, the leadership of the Interior Ministry was practically looking forward to the changes. They were well aware that this is coming, and they tried to keep the whole system somehow intact. They weren't really successful. After the free and fair elections, Also, there were some political hiccups, like it came to light that the state security was still monitoring politicians who they were not supposed to monitoring. So there was a major scandal called Dunagate, and after that, the former structure was broken up into intelligence agency, counterintelligence agency. The domestic intelligence agency was dissolved, and also military counterintelligence became a separate entity, and there was a separate technical intelligence agency. Many of the top people were sent into retirement, or few were fired, and the second line of leadership was practically elevated. So they tried to do that, as far as we know, in-house, to keep the practice and the experience there. And also, it was very interesting for me to see. I saw very few documents from 1990, because usually they are only available until 1989, but still a few are there. And in the 1990 files, there are already not comrade, but Mr. as the going to the higher or superior officer. So the changes were quite quickly executed in this regard.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a coffee break, whether you like it or not.